Welcome, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Today we're continuing with our series, Average Folks in the Afterlife. And we've just had a break in transmission. I was 10 minutes into this when, once again, we had difficulties. Most annoying that. And if you ever try to do any YouTube videos yourself, you'll see just how annoying it actually is. You just go along, and after 8 minutes or 10 minutes, suddenly it disconnects. And then you have to start all over again. There seems to be no option. Average Folks in the Afterlife, a great modern book of consciousness expansion and projection, is by one Jurgen Ziewe. It's called Multidimensional Man, and I highly recommend it to you. And I should also mention he has a marvelous website of the same name, which you can explore at your leisure. And it includes, as he is an artist, many visual depictions of his memories of afterlife, astral plane landscapes, astral plane and beyond. Highly recommended. I'd like to begin with an experience he had being taken to a place of earthly suffering. It's fairly explanatory, self-explanatory, I guess. As soon as I left my body, I was escorted by a silent guardian to a place which was dark and impregnated with fear. But I was reassured by a benevolent, empowering energy. I was led into a spare room where a man had been tied to a chair and was being tortured. He was a victim of a brutal regime. The henchmen serving the punishment received a cruel satisfaction from their evil deed, but their victim was my focus. To my relief, my guide indicated that his ordeal was nearly over, and that I was there to ease his distress and prepare him to move as gently as possible into the next dimension. He said there was a real danger that his state of mind could be so severely unbalanced by the ordeal that it could catapult him into a very dark place, which he didn't deserve. Every time pain was applied to his body, I knew that he could see us. My invisible partner had generated a soothing light around the man. When he passed out from the pain, the light was there to comfort him. I tried to hold his attention and said with all the positive warmth I could muster, "It will soon be over. Just be patient." I felt a great pity for him and compensated for his pain with warmth and love, reassuring him with thoughts of the beautiful world I told him he would enter. I knew I was getting through to him, and my guide confirmed it by increasing the radiance around him. The man's face relaxed and he smiled. Then he returned to his body for the last time. He didn't even feel the pain of the blow which killed him. My guide took over and carried him away. I returned to my body. Now, people work in the afterlife, or some of them do. And here's an interesting aspect of that. Interview with a dead print worker. In my dream, I wandered through the building where I used to work. I became aware of a young man in his late 20s walking toward me. He was very tall, at least 7 feet, which struck me as odd, and I became aware that I was dreaming, and I burst into instant wakefulness. I decided to start a conversation with the man, who was very open and friendly. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me that he was working in the printing department. I found this very curious and asked him whether he would mind showing me, as I was interested in the trade because of my profession as an artist. He led me to a spacious printing room with large litho presses. He told me that he was working at the proofing stage, and he showed me some very high-quality proofs of intricate illustration work. I marveled at the superb quality and tried to identify what it was I was looking at. But then I became distracted by the fact that the room contained huge, cumbersome machines. The fact that we were in the fifth dimension made me wonder what these machines could possibly be used for. A whole fifth-dimensional print and media infrastructure was in front of me, and it didn't make any sense at all. I contemplated the possibility that the whole environment existed only as a result of the expectation and intent of this man, that he had loved his job as a printer, and as a result had created this printing heaven. I asked the man whether he knew that he was dead, and he confirmed the accuracy of my speculation. I used to work as a printer when I was alive, he said, and I still rather enjoy my work. And I should point out here that Jurgen has several other experiences where he speaks to people in the other world who do not seem to know that they are dead at all, and react as puzzled or as though he was some kind of a loony. So just a small point there. I looked with astonishment at the vast layout. For some reason, the physicality of the environment and the scale of the plot struck me as odd, and I began to marvel at the power of his fantasy. Fascinated, I expected the whole scene to be just an elaborate Hollywood stage set, and asked his permission to open one of the covers of the giant machines to discover what was inside. To my astonishment, I saw the engine working away inside. It had all the mechanical detail it had existed on physical Earth. Had it existed on physical Earth, sorry. It struck me that on this dimension, rather than things being less mechanical and depending more on thought for existence, objects appeared to be even more developed than on the physical dimension. As I chatted to the young man, I noticed that his 7-foot height shrank to a more normal size. During our conversation, he drew attention to the fact that I was still alive on Earth. He wondered whether he could ask me a favor and relate a message to his parents who lived in Leeds or Liverpool. I can't remember which. I suggested that I write it down so I could bring the detail back to my physical consciousness. I decided to link the address and the name with the house number in one sentence to retain it better. Halfway through the address, the young man changed his mind and thought it might not be a very good idea at all. I agreed that it could lead to all sorts of complications. I then asked him what he enjoyed most about being dead. He said the thing he enjoyed above all was the ability to fly. Then he took off and flew through the open loading bay doors. I followed behind, and we both indulged in some terrific aerobatics. At one stage, I suggested we pretend to sit on an invisible armchair with our feet up, holding a drink in the right hand and gliding through the air, which he found very amusing. So we'll leave that there and switch to another book with a contrasting experience. From Jane Sherwood's Post-Mortem Journal, in which through 1964 published, in which through again automatic writing, she communicates with the spirit of T.E. Lawrence, author of the famous 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and whose life during the Arab rebellion against the Turks in World War I was immortalized in the film Lawrence of Arabia. Yes, indeed, this is Lawrence of Arabia. So, and a jolly good book it is too. Very informative, honest, and really cuts through the crap. Got 2 sections of this book. I want to get to the one that contrasts with Jurgen's. I have wandered far from my own countryside and have found an ancient city where are seats of learning. Not an exact replica of my own Oxford, but a university town of widely spaced buildings of noble aspect. At a distance across meadows there arose a great tower of many stories, and towards this I went. At its base I came upon a man I had once known slightly, to our mutual pleasure, and after a kind greeting he has taken me to his rooms. All this is like, but yet unlike, the university life I used to know, and I find myself among very choice spirits who have made me welcome and are urging me to stay among them. But I am still fired by my surprise, and I shall not rest until I have found a fellow enthusiast. I have found my man. Thomas is a quiet, studious soul, but at the mention of bookmaking, he was transformed. He led me away to his workshop and press, and here are all the familiar tools of his art, only of a better make and adapted to finer ends than any I have had the joy of handling before. We were soon deep in the technicalities of his craft, and I have been welcomed as a learner and helper. Books are still needed, the books are still being written and read and studied, but they are not being turned out in the senseless and shoddy profusion of earth. Such books are being produced, fruits of wisdom, wit, and love of beauty, and are being handled with care and skill of craftsmanship which delight me. My cottage is forgotten, and I have thrown myself wholeheartedly into the work. We labor for the joy of it, and for as long as short a time as the joy lasts. We keep no journeyman hours here, and the lack of regular punctuation of time into day and night is a great freedom to us. In this cool, green-shaded workroom, I am learning many new arts of engraving, printing, and tooling, and in the pleasure of the hand and exultation of seeing that the work is good, and I am finding full satisfaction. My mind keeps pace with my hands and in profitable thinking, and I seem to have at last found a recipe for peace. A recipe for peace. Wow. That's just one aspect of the experience, and we'll get to another in a moment. Back to Jurgen. See if I can find what I'm looking for here. Jurgen often finds himself in towns, urban environments, in the middle ranges of the astral, not the hellish realms, not the higher realms, although we get to those later. Here's an example. As I moved through the town, I noticed that some of the houses looked rather neglected. One district I strayed into looked decidedly bleak. Other parts are much more friendly, with restaurants, shops, and pubs. I was surprised by the fact that the nice and not so nice parts of the town were not that far apart, just like on Earth. Another sign that this dimension was clearly very closely linked to our physical world. People were socializing in the streets. Although the atmosphere was very Earth-like, it was also quite different. There seemed to be more interaction between the people than on Earth, and there was a rather more lethargic attitude to the place. Yet so far I had not come across anything that would make this town a particularly attractive place to live. I addressed a lady who appeared to be in her late 30s. "How long have you lived here?" "Oh, for ages," she replied. "Do you like it here?" I said. "I do get a bit bored sometimes, but I don't know where else to settle. It's not the most exciting place." As I looked around, I felt I had to agree with her. This was a drab little place. I decided it was best to leave and wondered what method I could use to get to a higher, more pleasant, more interesting dimension. I recalled that in the past I had achieved this by entering a building and rising to underneath the roof and by going through it. I've done that myself, by the way. Going through ceilings. I was well aware of the fact that it was a psychological crutch, a technique used using visualization, and not the best or most learned way to go about achieving my aim. But I had no better idea but I had no better idea than what better means would be. Meditation and chanting were certainly an alternative, but this usually brought unexpected results. Another point I would agree with. With meditation, one often increases one's level of vibration, but sometimes much farther than one intends. So anyway, I entered a large empty house and did what I had done before and floated upwards toward the ceiling. I considered whether I should call for help to raise me to a higher dimensional level, but decided instead to leave the room via a door leading into a long hall. When I opened the door at the far end of the hall, I walked onto the roof of a large multi-story building, like a huge block of flats. The building was empty, neglected, and needing attention. Litter was scattered everywhere. I made a huge jump to an adjacent building at least 10 meters away. This building was much better kept, and I was welcomed by a girl in her late teens. Although she looked young, her demeanor was that of a much older woman. "Hi," I greeted her. Then I asked her straight out, "How old were you when you died?" I felt it was unnecessary to introduce myself, as she had already sized me up. "I was 85, she answered. "So you are really a little old lady?" I said, smiling affectionately. "I suppose I am," she said charmingly. I warmed to her immediately. She was a little more than 5 feet tall, very pretty with shortish, curly blonde hair. She had a warmth and kindness in her eyes. "Do you live here on your own?" I wanted to know. "No, I have a friend who used to be a history teacher. His name is Arthur. He hasn't been here a very long time." I saw a man in his early 40s waving to us. He was a little full around the waist, but had a friendly smile. He came over and shook hands with me. There was something about his personality and the way he spoke that I found distinctly uninspiring. I had the feeling that if I stayed, I'd get bored very quickly, and sought an excuse to leave. He must have felt my discomfort. "Wait," he said, "I must show you something very interesting. I have discovered a way of teaching children history in a very fascinating way." He opened a book with nice illustrations of ancient Greek scenes. He told me that he could manipulate the drawings with his thoughts, and the pictures would move like film. I looked at him and pointed out that back at home we called this multimedia, but I admitted that his version looked quite sophisticated. I looked on as he animated the characters in the illustrations with his thoughts, and wondered whether he knew I was an illustrator who earned his living producing 3D computer graphics and animations. I began to feel a little bit impatient with his demonstration as he moved little characters about pointlessly in his book. I apologized to the couple and told them that my time was limited and that I had to leave, but that I would come back if they wanted me to. "No, we don't," they replied to my utter astonishment. Then they both burst into a broad grin. "Of course we would like you to." "What is your name?" I asked the 85-year-old teenager. "I am Maha," she said. I asked her to repeat it several times because I'd never heard such a name before, and thought I would not remember it. I gave her a gentle and warm hug, and then waved goodbye to the couple and left. Ah, yes, here we are. Presently, I was walking down the higher dimensional counterpart of Christchurch Road in Boscombe, Bournemouth, near where we lived. There are many astral counterparts of physical plane towns and villages and cities. They're quite similar, and then as you go higher levels, they become stranger and more wonderful and less like Earth. So yes, there are counterparts of many towns and several counterparts. Again, it wasn't the landmarks that made me recognize the place, rather the atmosphere. Although I knew clearly the road I was in, the buildings were all different. There was an unhurried quality of life here. It was friendly and peaceful. This was indeed a place to have holidays, a super holiday resort. There were bars and shops, which were more like little galleries where the owner could display their creative skills. I saw a shop which had very novel glass and crystal four-poster and other beds on display. Crystal four-poster beds? Don't you just love it? On the physical level, they would have struck me as uncomfortable, but without body mass weight to worry about, I could imagine that crystal could have a very invigorating effect upon the spirit. Attracted by loud noise and a jovial atmosphere, I strayed into a nearby pub. I thought it would be good to get more involved with the locals. People enjoy themselves in bars on Earth, especially when alcohol lowers them inhibitions. but the people here had taken enjoyment onto another level altogether. They interacted free-spiritedly and were amazingly relaxed around one another. This pub in particular was a very vibrant place. I saw people frolicking and flirting provocatively in front of everyone else without any self-consciousness whatsoever. The absence of inhibition and the prevailing feeling of solidarity, friendship, and intimacy was something I had never experienced before. There was certainly a feeling of sexuality in the air. The atmosphere tingled with it. I saw a woman not wearing a top, quite openly showing her affection to her aroused boyfriend. There was something liberating about the absence of any scruples. This was a group where everyone was in agreement. They all enjoyed the jovial and free-spirited atmosphere. Still very conscious of my scientific intentions, I thought to venture into a more sociological form of study. I asked the man next to me whether there were any problems with morality in this world, whether anyone ever took offense to what happened here. A few people around me responded as if I had just posted the most ridiculous question in the world. To my utter astonishment, but to the great amusement of others, two men took out their penises and blew them up to ridiculous proportions. Encouraged by such amusement, and with the power of their strange imagination, they twisted and contorted their sexual organs into the most ludicrous shapes. Then the women joined in and competed with each other by changing their bare breasts into any kind of fruit that one could think of. The hilarity of the display was very contagious, and like everyone else, I fell apart laughing. Soon the whole pub was engaged in the game. I was laughing so much I felt I would not be able to stop. Gradually it all calmed down, and I wanted to know whether I too had the power to change my shape. With an effort of will, I grew myself to about 10 feet tall, accompanied by loud cheering and applause from the crowd. My conclusion was that these people had no problem enjoying their body and sexuality. They were all in it together. There was nobody who would object, because they were all attracted to each other simply by functioning on the same level. Simply by functioning on the same level. Same as the higher dimensions. Everyone is terribly spiritual on the higher levels. And that's because they're in their comfort zone. So, back to T.E. Lawrence. For another comparison. I do not propose to detail all my hesitations and doubts, nor my struggle with diffidence and lifelong inhibitions. The monk and the prig in me were very strong, and I found at last a companion who was minded to follow the same course, and he took me to various haunts of his. These girls, he said, are not prostitutes or anything like it. They are women who have missed sexual experiences during their earth life and need to work out this lack before they can progress, just as we do. So we are all in the same boat and start equal. You will find some lovely people here. Much of my reluctance had left me when Mitchell explained the differences between sexual relationships here and those known on Earth. To understand them, it is necessary to remember that there has been a total change in body substance, and that the basis of all relationships here is purely emotional. One does not think how handsome nor how plain another person is, but judges them entirely on the quality of their auras or emanations. Where an attraction between the sexes is felt, it is a pure emotion of love, and the urge is to draw near and share the warmth and beauty one desires. Lust as such is hardly possible in this plane. If union takes place, it is an interfusion of two bodies, and an ecstatic and satisfying experience, far more lovely than anything one could experience in an earthly body. There is no question of the procreation of children, so that all the more sordid side of sexual relations is unnecessary. Note the use of the word sordid. You know, said my friend, you are wrong to try and minimize the importance of sexual life. It is one of the problems most men have to solve when they come here. We have to come to terms with a body compacted of emotion and far more highly charged than before. There are regions where things are done just as on Earth, although no children are produced. I have known men who have been with us for a time, but have been so obsessed with this business that they have elected to go back there because they hankered after the old ways. They will probably find them unsatisfying after a while and will come back to us again, but they have to work it out for themselves. We entered a large and friendly gathering of young people and were made welcome. Groups formed and dispersed, and there was an air of expectation and excitement about which it all had an effect on us. I found a girl who pleased me and who was gracious enough to approve of my company, and we were both glad to improve our knowledge of each other. She was small and slight, radiant yet veiled in her own tentativeness. We wandered away together, absorbed in comparing our earth experiences, and soon became friendly and comfortable together. I was charmed by the ease of this feminine comradeship. We were both curious and expectant. We both admitted freely our lack of experience and our need to remedy it. Yet we shared a great diffidence and sensitive approach. I did not return to the home for a long while. We two wandered happily in an enchanted land, exploring the delights of an intimate companionship, crowned by the magic of union. She is very lovely, that her heart is an innocence, joined to a flame-like ardor, and between us we create a burning bliss of union. I am intoxicated with happiness, and for a time have forgotten all my problems and difficulties. Without sorrow, we both began to feel the beginning of the inevitable withdrawal, and have discovered that neither of us expected a permanent relationship. This has brought no disappointment, but rather gratitude for a perfect experience shared. Winifred tells me that she is in search of her own man, one who had been her elder and had died early in the century. She suspects he has gone on, and that her only way of finding him will be to make progress in her own development. So for her, her idol has been the means to that end, and we are able to part with no regrets, or anything but a great regard and affection for each other. Blessed girl, I thank my stars that I have met her, and I foresee the day in the not too far distance where she will go on her way to join her own man. So we have bidden each other farewell. She returns to her friends, and I find myself back again at the only home I know. Mitchell is delighted with my improvement, and we have talked at length about the ways in which he wants me to work my own salvation. I have got beyond resenting his intrusion into my private life. Such an attitude is ruled out by the very conditions under which we live, and I know and trust the affection and concern which prompt his interest. You have broken down one of your worst inhibitions, he said to me. You can feel for yourself how this release of energy has relieved the tension under which you are living. I think you will also find the anxiety factor, which was an indication of your fear of living, has been reduced. I won't even pretend that I didn't enjoy it, I admitted, but I still think it would have been impossible for me under Earth conditions. That, I'm afraid, is a symptom of another trouble of yours, he went on. We now have to work at it the great weight of distrust and resentment of your kind, which is making a dark center in your being. You need to mix more freely with people and to like them more. You will find this easier here than on Earth, because on this plane you will meet only congenial people. They all have reached a comparable standard of development. Yes, he said, your big difficulty is a scorn of slowness and impatience of mediocrity, and if you will forgive me, a really horrible feeling of superiority to most of the pleasant and ordinary people you are meeting here. They cannot avoid recognizing your reaction to them, and so they keep away from you. Now, how are we to get that right? I think you really feel that you ought to be able to find and meet the great people of the past, with whom you would perhaps regard as your equals. But, my dear fellow, you are not yet fit to come near them. Look at yourself. I looked. Either I saw myself through his eyes or in some kind of immaterial mirror, but this is what I saw. Shafts of keen blue light struggling to issue from a core of dark and muddied color, a tumult of angry, murky shadow at the center, and as a response to his merciless criticism, angry dartings of red flying from it. It was not a pretty sight. You see, he said gently, we have to clear all that before you are ready to go on. Well, some provocative thoughts and depictions, and I would ask you to remember these are one or two people's experience. And the astral plane and the planes above it are made up of people's experiences, just like life on Earth. There are only, how shall we say, loose guidelines and standards. There are no hard and fast rules. Much joy, much pleasure, much transcendence. And with that, I leave you for today. And blessings to you all. And we will look forward to number 6.